Yo, this is a motherfucker who needs no introduction. You are watching Breaking Records Radio.
All right, you are now tuned into Breaking Records Radio. My name is Alex, and I have here with me Kid called Quest from the New York rap group Young, Black, and Gifted. As solo artist, as well as the group, the duo put in mad work over the recent years, with the latest single, Lonely at the Top, dropping recently, November 17th of 2020. Please welcome to the show, Kid called Quest. What's good, my man?
Hey, how you doing?
Oh man, I'm doing great myself, and I can't thank you enough for taking the opportunity to speak to me here today. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
100%. So I'm excited to talk about the new work that you have currently going on. I want to talk about the new single as well. That being said, I would like to kind of back this conversation up a little bit and talk about some history and how you kind of ended up getting started as an MC before getting into that, or as a producer rather, before getting into some of the new material. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, that's cool, man.
Sounds good. So I'm just kind of interested, from a fan's perspective, what was your first introduction to hip-hop culture? Not even necessarily injecting yourself into it in any kind of meaningful way, but just from a fan's perspective, how did you end up getting introduced to this thing?
My first time actually being introduced to hip-hop, my first two groups I ever heard was Ghetto Boys and the Fat Boys. And I was introduced to the Fat Boys through my grandmother Truck, rest in peace. She used to always, me and her used to always watch the movie Disorderlies whenever I used to visit her. And that's how I got introduced to the Fat Boys. And, you know, that was one of my favorite rap groups. And then my father, he used to always play the Ghetto Boys. Mine was playing tricks on me when I was younger. And, you know, ever since then, you know, those two groups have always been two of my favorite hip-hop groups from back in the day. And it was like the actual first piece of hip-hop I got introduced to as a youngster. I also had a brother who later on started DJing, doing a hip-hop radio show at the U of R, the University of Rochester, the 88.5 show back in the day, along with another DJ named D Imperial, who also had a radio show. And my brother, he used to always get records upon records upon records, and used to get like releases early and stuff. So I used to always get albums and stuff earlier than everybody else, and I was always in tune with a lot of stuff, and he'll always be introducing and putting me on the stuff. But to backtrack a little bit, to go back a little bit before all that, the actual first hip-hop album I ever bought, I would say would have been DMX album, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood. And I was actually pissed off when I bought the album, because listening to the vinyls that my brother used to have, I accidentally bought the album from Kmart, and they know the full album was edited. But that was the first actual album I ever bought. And yeah.
I've made that mistake far too many times.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, even just digging, like, right? It's so hard to tell whether or not an album is clean or dirty, and so often if you're digging through pawn shops and whatnot, you end up coming across those clean versions, and they're so hard to tell.
Yeah, man. I had to learn the hard way a couple times getting albums from Kmart and Walmart, because, you know, I never really stepped to like that, the malls and all that like that to get music. Yeah. That's where I found out that's all the dirty music from, like the record theaters, the Best Buys, and the FYEs and all that. So, you know, I learned later on to start going there to get my music. But you know, yeah, it was a lot of stuff that I was listening to before I actually got into actually making music. But yeah, DMX, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood, and I want to say Jizza, Beneath the Surface was the first two actual hip hop albums I ever bought.
Gotcha. Growing up in Rochester, were you aware of the local scene that was around you at that time? You mentioned the radio show D Imperial and your brother, but outside of that kind of context, were you aware that there was a larger scene that was going on in your community?
Honestly, I knew that they had artists from around the way, because, you know, I lived half my life in a suburb outside of Rochester called Webster.
Gotcha.
And then the rest of my high school years, I ended up moving back into the inner city and finished out school and everything there. But back when I was staying out in Webster, like, I was aware that there was other artists from around the way that was from the same areas that we were from, that was rapping. The ones that I really knew the most, was the ones that actually stayed in the same apartment complexes as me. That would have been Black Sinatra, my brother man MOZ. Him and MOZ, they was one of the first two that I known from Rochester, from the same area, that was getting songs on the big radio station here, 104 WDKX. And then there was couple other artists I got introduced to later on. Nickel Field, my man Nickel Fields. That was my brother, man, too, who was part of the group Icons with our man Midnight. And then Curtis Cope, who used to go by the name L.I., and there's a whole bunch of other people I started learning about later on down the road, like Warfield. That consists of the Sim from the Cloth. Who else was on there? Mab and Two-Way. I remember getting their album. I went to a spot. I forgot what the name of the music spot was, but I remember buying their album. I seen it, like, this looks dope. Copped it and loved that. And the little E, before he was going by, was he going by? Yeah, he was going by Ito. I think he was with a group called Rich Porter, if I remember. I remember I was getting them CDs. And it was a whole bunch of people. 38 Special, and used to go by the name Specialist.
Wow.
There's a lot of people, man, and but the one crew from Rochester that always stood out to me, though, and they stood out to a lot of people because they was like one of the first actual crews from here that I actually seen getting like actual album time slots on BET and everywhere, on radio and on TV, would be the Upstate Cypher. Them dudes, they was going hard with it. They had the vinyls, the tapes, the CDs, the videos, everything, the whole nine. So they grind actually inspired me a lot.
Being the fact that you were connected to college radio at that period of time, and again, like, I guess the late 90s, early 2000s, I always see community radio, college radio being such kind of central parts of the community, right? More than just introducing people to the music, they're working as a community builder. Let that be allowing people to actually go up to the radio station and perform freestyles or whatever, or make call-in requests, and then you kind of bridge the community in together that way. How involved in the radio program were you? Did you end up frequenting the actual radio station and meeting kind of the community that you're talking about? Let it be Black Sinatra or MOZ or the Upstate Cypher. Like, how involved were you in that?
Actually, I wasn't really involved in it. That was more of my brother. He was DJing he had the radio show.
Gotcha.
And he was DJing. But like you just said, he used to have the freestyle sessions and all that. So since I was staying in Webster, trying to get the frequency sometimes for a show off the college thing was sometimes hard. So what I used to do was he used to pre-record, or he used to record, not pre-record, he used to record all his shows. So then when he had like the tapes sitting around and stuff, like when I go to school and walk to school and stuff, sometimes I'll sneak and grab one of his tapes, pop them in the Walkman, and I'll just listen to the show from there. And that's how I was getting introduced to a lot of other artists from around the way, like Uwops, who else he had? Dukums, a dude named Dukums who was nice. It was a lot of dudes, and then he was also getting other DJ mixtapes too that he used to have CDs sitting around. I used to sneak and get those, and that's how I got introduced to Uwop and Tony Bananas and all them. So there's a lot of artists from here that's been doing a lot of stuff going way back, and I'm talking about like this had to be around, I want to say 2000, 2001, no later than 2002.
Gotcha.
So we had it was a lot of stuff like the Ill Union. It was just a lot. It was a lot of artists. Like we always had a lot of artists up here that was real talented.
So at what point do you start kind of, I guess, actually participating in the culture? Let it be as a breakdancer, a writer, or an MC, or a DJ yourself, taking over your brother's craft. At what point do you start kind of involving yourself, and in what medium do you choose to express yourself in that way?
I started getting into making music. I want to say when I started making beats when I was 13. So yeah, I started about around 11, 12. I used to have a little rap crew I used to be in with my man Louie, my man Matt, man Dave, and we used to all go to my man Louie crib because he actually was one of the first people I know who had an actual recorder on a computer. So what we used to do was he had like this long skinny microphone. I think it was like part of an answer machine or something, but we figured out how to rig it up and record off of it, and we used to just freestyle and rap over instrumentals. And I used to always come up on instrumentals because my brother was a DJ, so he used to always have mad on 12-inch singles and all that have the acapella, the song, and the instrumental on it. So I used to always record the instrumentals on the tapes, bring over to my man Louie crib, pop them in the radio, have the microphone on, pick the beat up through the microphone off of a radio, then we just start rapping in it. But after doing that so long, you start getting tired of it. So then I started getting interested. I was like, I want to start making my own beats and start rapping over my own music. So, once I started that, I remember just like it was yesterday, my brother had an old keyboard that was sitting down in the basement, And I cut school early that day. This is like probably like the last, like a couple of days before the actual last day of school. And I remember it was hot as hell outside. And I was like, man, I ain't going to school today. So I ended up like acting like I was about to walk to school and then turn back around, waiting for my mother to go to sleep. And I snuck back in the crib and went down the basement and was just down there for like a good couple hours. So the keyboard was just sitting right there. And, when you're bored and you're young, you tend to get into dumb stuff and doing stupid stuff. So just start messing with stuff. So
Fair enough.
I started messing with this keyboard, and I was sitting there playing, just pressing keys. They know what I was really doing, and I noticed when I hit certain buttons, it make a certain function on it, and I could lay out little sounds the way I wanted to lay them out, or it'll duplicate whatever I was playing. So if I hit a certain key a couple of times, followed by another key, it'll play it in that same order. Then you used to have this ticking thing in it that'll go like that, not knowing what it was at the time, but later on found out what a metronome was, and then just repeat everything over and over. So I was just playing with this keyboard, and then, came back the next day, started messing with it some more, learned some more stuff on it, actually learned the drum pads on there, and learned how to program drums on there, but I didn't know what a kick and a snare was. So I'll be making beats on there, doing double snares, not knowing what I was actually doing. Then we trying to mimic like Swiss Beats and everybody at that time. So, then, after a while, probably like the second week into it, I kind of figured out everything, and from there, I was just making beats from there, and, a lot of them joints was horrible. Like, they was trash first, the beginners. But, as time went on, I got more interested in it, and then I wanted to learn more. So we used to have a music store in the village of Webster that they used to go to. I started going to in the summertime a lot, because there really wasn't too much to do out there, because, like I said, it was about 20 minutes outside of the inner city of Rochester. So, half the summer I used to go to this music store, and I'd just mess around with all the keyboards and stuff there. And they had this one keyboard that I found a lot of interest in. It was called the Yamaha DJ-X. And this keyboard had like some hard-hitting drums and everything on it. So I was like, damn, I need to start saving up, do whatever I got to do and try to get this keyboard. So, I was really grinding it out. I probably collect pop bottles or, do certain stuff, probably help somebody move some stuff and, get a little $20 here and there. But I was like, if I can save up this $400, I could get this keyboard, and eventually the following school year, I say around February, I finally saved up enough, and I got the Yamaha DJ-X2, which was a newer version of the keyboard I used to mess with, and I used to always sit and learn the programming of that. And one day, all that changed. There was a button on there that said sampling, which I had no clue what that was, and I had Canada's first album playing. The song I Honor You was playing, and I accidentally hit that sample button the same time that song was playing, and it picked up the audio, and it laid it out on all the keys. So I'm sitting there pressing keys, and for a second I thought the CD was messed up. So it took me a good minute to figure out what I done did, and once I figured it out, I was like, oh, snap, I could take a recording from this, lay it on this, play it out the way I want, and play exactly and sound how I want it to sound. And from there, that's where I got introduced to sampling and been sticking to it ever since. And the crazy thing I always tell everybody, people be thinking I be making this up, I actually learned how to chop up samples before I actually learned how to loop. Like, I ain't know what a loop was, I ain't know what a chop was, but I was actually chopping stuff up. And I ain't started looping stuff up until I got my next piece of equipment, which was the Kai S20, and that's when I started learning how to loop, and went from there, and eventually moved up. And then my man Divine, and my older brother had ended up buying an MPC 2000 XL, and he ain't taken out the box for like a good year. But my man Divine, he had an MPC 2000, the original one, and when my brother told me I was making beats, he told me to come over to his crib, and he started showing me the functions of the MPC and all that. And then eventually my brother ended up taking his 2000 XL out of the box. So whenever my brother left, I used to go sneak down the basement, play with that, and I learned that whole machine pretty much. My man showed me the basics, but everything else I pretty much learned on my own and all that. And I was like, I need to get some dope drums and all that. And I remember my brother had a crate of hip-hop records. He had about maybe 10, 20 crates. One day I sat down there while he was at work, and I snuck through all the record crates, and I sampled every open drum I could get off of every record. And from there, I had my own little drum sounds and everything, and started going from there, just started going crazy and everything from there on the beats, and started making it until I got a job and eventually bought my own MPC.
Wow. What a story, man. What era is this? Is this like the late 90s, kind of early 2000s that you started really diving in and practicing on this equipment?
this would be the early 2000s. This would be about 2001. About 2001, 2002.
That's really interesting because I interview a fair amount of people that kind of are involved in local hip hop scenes anyhow, mostly within Canada, but what I see is the same kind of experiences happen across the border as well. And generally, the earlier crowd, so in the early 90s to the mid 90s, you're getting a lot of people that are interested in production, but there's a barrier there when it comes to equipment because there's costs associated with it, right? In order to be an MC, all you have to have is a pen and paper and then the ability in order to record something or even just like fucking around freestyling with friends kind of thing, right? But in order to hop into production, it actually costs money. Like there's a significant amount of money involved in getting an MPC or an SB1200 or whatever it is that you're utilizing, right? Maybe you can make some like pause tapes or like 4-track tapes and whatnot, and you kind of fuck around that way and makeshift something. But in order to seriously do it, it requires money, and that it kind of has a limitation aspect to it. What happens around the turn of the century, though, is things like Ableton, Fruity Loops, and that kind of shit becomes available, GarageBand. Then you end up getting a huge wave of people that are coming into it, and those restrictions are in many cases kind of lifted because you're able to pirate a lot of those software or a lot of that software. But you went the opposite way. You were in the early 2000s. You were in that moment where everyone was using Ableton, Fruity Loops, and whatnot. But you saved up the money. You did the traditional kind of OG way of making this happen, which is save up money, go buy something local, and just learn one piece of equipment at a time until you're able to make something substantial.
Yeah, because it's crazy. Because like you just said, the amount of money back in the day that it cost. Like if you was serious. That was just like the DJs. They were serious about learning. That wanted to DJ. Like those dudes would save up their money to get their second turn.
Yeah. 1200s are expensive.
If I was correct back then, I believe those things was going for like what, $1,500 a piece.
In Canada, with Canadian prices, anyhow, I know that they were going for like $2,500-$3,000 sometimes for a set.
Yeah. So it was like that with the MPCs. Back then, I remember I was like, damn, because I was always asking myself. Because I started saving up for my MP before I was even at a legal age to get a job in New York State. Because you had to be 16 to work at a McDonald's. And I remember I had like $300 saved up. So I was like, damn. When I was 15, I was trying to get a job. And I used to line the applications and put that I was 16 on a lot of these job applications. Had a couple interviews. I worked a week or two at a job till they found out that I was underage and they had to let me go. But then when I turned 16, I ended up actually getting my first job. My first legal job without lying about my age, getting at McDonald's. And I remember I almost got fired a couple times for sneaking in hours trying to get the money to get this MPC, because at the time the MPCs was going for, to get the lowest grade MPC without the full blowouts and everything in it, that was about $1,500-$1,600. So I remember I would be working, somebody said if I want to pick up the shift, I'd be like, hell yeah, I'm about to grab that shift. I sneak in a couple extra hours. There was one point the boss was like, yo, you've been working almost 12 hours today. It's time for you to go. And I was like, damn. Then they be trying to cut my hours down, so I wouldn't go over the New York State hour guidelines. But I was just grinding my ass off, man. It was crazy because, like I'm telling everybody, when I was 16, every kid that was 16 during that time, they got jobs to save up for their first car. Me, I was working to save up for my first MPC. And, eventually, after 8-9 months of working, I was making like $75-$80 a week. I ended up saving up just enough. And the Spot Sound Stores, I got lucky. They had an MPC 2000 XL. They had it there that somebody traded in. They dropped it down. I guess they were trying to get rid of it so they get new inventory in. They dropped it down from the 1600 down to 1250, 1300, something like that. So I had just a little bit over enough. And I remember I hurried up and hopped on it and got that MPC. And that was around the time he was getting ready to move out of Webster back into the inner city. So, yeah, once I got that and I started making, a lot more beats, I noticed during that time, I was like one of the only few kids in my school that was making beats. And then I want to say like the following year, they would have been around, that would have been in 10th grade. About towards the end of 11th to 12th grade, that's when I noticed a lot more kids in the school were starting to get into making beats and all that. And that's when the Fruity Loops and the Acid Pros and the Cakewalks and all that. That's when those all started coming out at affordable prices, and it was easier for people. It was a lot more easier access for people to get those. And like you said, it opened up a floodgate for everybody to have access to making music.
Yeah, it's crazy how much things have changed. Like you mentioned, things just becoming more accessible, even in terms of equipment. But it's 100% the case, right? Like nowadays, you can get an MPC studio for a couple $100 US. You can get a machine for a few $100s as well. Things are relatively cheap and obtainable and affordable. Yet you still have most producers hopping into things, just sticking with digital software, right? They're not using hardware. It's crazy that the limitations have reduced so much in terms of physical hardware, and there's still that sound that's so desirable that you only get from physical hardware, yet people are still gravitating towards digital software in almost every case as new producers kind of come up and go into things. How has yours kind of system changed over the years? Are you still working with the same sort of equipment that you used back in the day, or are you kind of gravitated towards digital shit as well?
I ended up moving towards the digital equipment. The software, the first digital thing I started using was the machine. I was on the 2000 XL from 2003 all the way up to 2010. Well, no, even before that. I want to say 2001 all the way up to 2010. And then I remember, when I seen the machine, they was promoting it heavy, and there's a lot of producers that I looked up to that was starting to get that was getting hip to it and was doing stuff with it, like Ski Beast. I would probably say he was the one that probably really sold me into getting it, like that taught me into getting it. And I've seen the stuff he was doing on it, and I was like, dang. I'm like, yo, he just did that like it was an NPC. So I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna step on the machine and go get that. I'm gonna snatch that up and learn that and kind of transition over. So what I eventually did was I ended up getting the machine, and I remember I sat on it for like a good couple of months before I started using it. So then once I installed everything, because I hated the first update that they had with it, I believe was that 1.4, 1.5. Like I didn't like it at first. It was like so many bugs with it. But then when it came out with the 1.6, 1.7, like it improved a lot. So I pretty much learned it the same and started using it like the same way as I was using the 2000 XL, and went from there and ended up falling in love with it. And then I ended up which I regret. I ended up getting rid of my 2000 XL. I remember I traded somebody the 2000 XL for the MPC 2500 because I was going to go back, but I didn't really care too much for the 2500. So then I was like, dang, I ain't got no room for this. It's just sitting here collecting dust. So I ended up taking the 2500 and traded it in, and ended up getting an MPC Studio, which was similar to the machine. And then I was rocking on that for a minute, and then that right there caused a conflict because I was like, oh damn, this is like a love triangle. Because everything better than the MPC studio software does, but the MPC studio software do things better than what the machine does. So it's like, damn, it's like you had two different women. Like, oh, she's good at doing this. Oh, she's good at it. So I was like, damn, I should have stuck to one, which I still kind of regret to this day. But sometimes I catch myself going back and forth between the Renaissance and the machine. But yeah, once I made that transition over, I got used with the workflow and everything, and showing up, like the workflow is so much quicker on it, and chopping samples, bouncing out stuff, tracking out beats. Got so used to doing that versus the old school way of doing it, where you had to do it sound after sound after sound, and it was just so much. It became so much more convenient, and when you had to make moves, go out of town or whatever, it was easier to carry because you had to worry about carrying this big ass beat machine and worry about the buttons possibly popping out. They made everything travel. They made everything perfect for traveling, perfect size and everything. So yeah, that machine definitely opened up that door for me.
100%. I want to talk about the current group, Young, Black, and Gifted. And again, for those listening at home, the new single is out now, November 17, 2020, called Lonely at the Top. The duo, it's you and Azaria. How did you guys end up meeting?
Oh yeah. You definitely get to that part. My bad. I know I could talk on for days. But yeah.
It's all good. It's all good.
What ended up happening, I want to say around 2005. Yeah, 2005, me and my man, Cisco, shout out to Cisco, by the way. Me and him ended up forming a group called Kicks and Snares. He was the MC, and I was doing the beats, and then later on, he ended up learning how to I ended up teaching him how to use the MPC. He started doing beats, so we started going by the name Kitchen Snares, and the local venues during that time, he's getting people invite him to do a lot of shows and performances. So we rolled together, and I remember it was a show in 2005, the day right before Christmas. So that was around the time I actually, a couple weeks before I released my first beat tape, which was J Quest vs. Ninth Wonder. He was telling me they about to have this big hip hop show. This was like the actual first hip hop show that I went to before he started getting invited to a lot of these other shows to perform and everything. I almost didn't go, but he talked me into it, and I was like, you know what, let me get up and get out the house. Because I used to, after high school, I wasn't working or nothing for like almost a good year. So I used to just sit in the crib all day and just make beats. So I was like, you know what, let me get out for a minute. And from there, me and on went to the show, and that's when I first met Rochester hip-hop legend Hassan Mackey and a couple other dudes in person. I ended up meeting our man Euphony, who was performing at the time with Azariah. And me and Euphony, I gave him a copy of the CD, gave him a copy of his CD. We ended up exchanging numbers, and we ended up linking up 2 weeks later. And the day that me and Euphony linked up was the day that I first met Azariah in person. And ever since then, we was all kicking it, chopping it up, talking about music and everything. And Azariah's already he's already working on a couple solo projects. So I started giving Azariah a bunch of beats and everything. And the first project that I gave him a bunch of beats for was his project Subject to Change. That was 2006. And he ended up dropping that to 2007, 2008, I believe. But yeah, we used to always get up and just chop it up. I make beats, put them on CDs, send them to him, used to mail them out and all that. But Azariah stayed all the way out in Henrietta, which is another suburb that was like, I want to say 15, 20 minutes outside the city too, going out west. So I used to just mail them out beat CD because, back then, if you try to email a beat on dial-up, you was going to be sitting there all day trying to get one beat out. So
no doubt.
I was like, man, it'd be less annoying and more convenient if I just go to the post office and just overnight this for 50 cents, this little light CD, and get it the next morning. So, me and Azariah kept building from there. Then Euphony fell back from music. So me and Azariah continued to build. And that was around the time, we really started building even more around the time when MLNY started falling back from music because he had his son. So me and Az, we just knocking out joints, he was putting out projects, and then, we just kept going. And I told him one day, I started thinking like, since we doing all this music together, man, and we got all these songs and stuff recorded together, we might as well form a group. So he was with it. So the first group we started going by, the first group name we started going by was Living Proof. And then, later on I found out about a group called Actual Proof that was out. So I'm like, damn, the name might get confused. People might get it confused with them. So I'm like, we got to switch the name up. And, I spent about a good week trying to think of a new name. And then it hit me. I was actually listening to Big Daddy Kane's song,
Young Black and Gifted,
Black.
Yeah, Young Black, yeah, exactly.
So I was listening to that, and it just clicked in me. I was like, that'd be a dope group name right there. I just rearranged the words a little. Instead of going by Young Gifted and Black, go by Young Black and Gifted. So I brought the idea to Azariah, and at first he was like, I don't know. He's like, I don't know. I'm like, nah, man, that name stands out, though. I mean, it's going to stand out a lot. Once we start getting stuff together and start putting stuff out, it's going to be a catchy name, man. So he's like, all right, we could try it. So I'm like, let's just try it. Give it a try. Why not? So we did that, and, we started working on our first album together, our first actual album together as Young Black and Gifted, which was a long time coming. And we banged that album out, and it took we worked on it for about maybe a good year or two because we had our schedules and everything. It was just all conflicting. So whenever we got a chance, we was off on the same day from work. We hurried to book a studio session those days and go knock those out. So once we got all the songs completed, I put the album together and everything, and we sat back and we listened to it. It was like, this right here is going to be dope. Even though, the mixing wasn't really up to par, how it should have been, but it was still, the material and everything was so dope. So I was like, we about to get these pressed up officially and everything, and start getting these out the blogs and everything, because, people was already during that time when we was getting ready to release, people was already familiar with my name because I had put out my project, my first compilation album, the Put Your Headphones On. The first two was the Put Your Headphones On soundtrack. Then I ended up dropping a compilation after that called Sampleaholic, which was a bunch of songs that didn't make it on the first Put Your Headphones On soundtrack. And then ended up dropping the actual Put Your Headphones On album. So those 3 compilations right there. Because the first original Put Your Headphones On, it got lost. My engineer, his computer crashed, and I had a bunch of songs that got lost. And I remember one of the songs I had a feature from Sean Price that was one of the songs that got lost and everything. So, once I put that out, a lot of the sites and everything, Kevin Nottingham and all them, a lot of them dudes familiar with my name and everything. So once we got ready to put out the Young Black and Gifted, I sent that out to a lot of the blogs and everything. So I didn't know what the actual response was going to be because the mixing and everything wasn't up to par how the actual compilations was. But this was when Audio Mac used to do rating on albums and all that. And they was one of the first people to do a rating on the album, and they gave it 5 out of 5. And I was like, oh shit, that's crazy. I'm like, yo, people actually like this, man. And then a bunch of other blogs started picking it up, and Facebook people was catching on to it and sharing it and everything. And a lot of people was like, yo, they really enjoyed the album. So I was like, yo, this is dope. I was telling Az, and we was feeling good about it. We was like, yo, we didn't know what the actual outcome of it was gonna be. But once I told him, like, yo, it's catching on, people like it, we started recording more music, and then we kind of fell back from the group thing for a minute because, he had some stuff he was trying to do, and also had stuff I was trying to do too. I was trying to do too on the side. So I was really trying to focus more on the production and everything, and trying to get more album placements instead of focusing on the group and everything. So then, Second Coming, 8 years later, we started working on that. We started working on Second Coming out because I told him before we went to New York City for a producer show that I was about to do. I was like, yo, I think it's time we do another group project, man. It's Young Black and Gifted. Let's try to give it another shot. So I was like, yo, a lot of stuff from 2012, 2013 up until now. I learned a lot of stuff. I learned a lot of do's and don'ts now. So I said, let's just give this another shot. So he's like, yo, he's with it. So I'm like, all right, let's definitely do this. So, I started cooking up a bunch of beats and everything, started sending them to him. He was writing songs left and right. I was sending him a batches of beats like every other week, and he'd just be knocking them out. So then when it got time to do for the final recording process and everything, we finally got access to a good studio with my man Midnight, who had crispy, clean and mixing sounds and all. Everything was just crispy with his mix downs and everything. We must have recorded the whole album, I want to say, like 4 or 5 sessions. And we had like so many songs that we recorded. We still got songs in this hard drive that we recorded that we forgot about that they actually get on the actual album. But we ended up cutting it in half, and the first actual album that we dropped before the Second Coming was a project we dropped last November called The Black Gift. That was like a prequel to Second Coming. And then Second Coming, a bunch of stuff came up, and we had it was a bunch of issues and stuff that was coming up. Personal stuff was coming up and all that. So we kind of fell back for a minute because Second Coming almost didn't come out. A lot of people don't know that. Like, it almost ain't dropped. The project was going to be scrapped. But, it gave us some time that everything worked out and everything, and got back on track, and we got ready to drop it. It was May. We were scheduled to drop it. Then I had something that came up I had to take care of, so I was like, yo, we're going to push it back probably for like the first week of June. So around that time, when we actually got ready to drop the actual album, the George Floyd situation happened. And the riots and all that stuff started breaking out, so people was actually hitting us up thinking that we put this album out intentionally because of the situation that was going on. Little they know, like, yo, this album's been recorded, done, mixed, mastered since August of 2019.
Yeah.
So this is already done. We just ain't get the package and everything ready. So we had the shirts and all that ready. So it just dropped in the midst of all that. Because I remember we was doing an interview with our man DJ Chris G. Shout out to Chris G from Straight from the Underground. We was in the middle of doing our actual interview with him, and that's when the riots broke out. And people was just flipping cars and stuff over and busting our windows. So we was like, yo, we got to cut this interview short. So I was like, damn, man, I wonder how that's going to end. It might have messed up a lot of stuff. But believe it or not, I mean, it seemed like people caught on to it more. It opened up a lot of people's ears to actually want to listen to it because everything that was going on this whole year, especially during the summertime, with the police brutalities, the riots and all that, Azariah's been covering those topics since the first album, even on some of his solo projects beforehand. So that really, people really start listening to it, and people was actually catching on to us a lot more. And a lot of websites is picking up on the Second Coming album and all that. And, the merch is moving and everything. And like I was telling people, like, this album was not dropped because all this was going on. Because, you had a bunch of people that's playing the trend following role. Oh, this is what's going on. Let me go from making this kind of music to start making this type of music now, make some positive music. But it was like, that wasn't what the case with us. We was already in this lane. We already been doing it. So that was nothing new for us. So everything that was going on just was topics that we was already covering. And as far as the Black Lives Matter shirts and all that, like that Young Black and Gifted logo, a lot of people, they paid attention. That's the original logo off the Long Time Coming album. The only thing with that was it was just a different color. So, yeah, it was a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I find it really interesting that the namesake was taken from the Big Daddy Kane track, and not only that, but especially as a producer, I think that's probably one of my favorite Marley Marl beats. And not only that, but I think it's way ahead of its time. Like that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that came out of Long Live the Kane, right? And that would have been 87, 88. That beat is way ahead of its time. It sounds like it came out of something like Live from the Barbecue, like main source shit in like 92, right? And I know 4 years maybe not seem like a whole great deal, but at that period of time in hip-hop, 4 years was a lot. That beat was incredible.
Yeah, that beat to this day still knocks. The way
100%.
Marley Marl, the drums on it, and the 808s in there, like, sure, if you was to remake that, it'd probably be hard for somebody to tell the difference between the original version and the newer version.
Yeah, it's just
its time.
Yeah, way ahead of its time. It's like dark and gritty in this era that really didn't have that as part of kind of the hip hop sound. It really ended up sounding like it comes out of 92 or 93. It kind of sounds disjointed on the album, to be honest, but I love it. It's like I said, it's probably my favorite Marley Marl beat. And that speaks a lot considering his catalog.
Yeah, I'll probably say that's my favorite one. Favorite beat, one of my favorite beats from after the Symphony.
Yeah. The Symphony's a classic, right?
Yeah, that beat was even ahead of its time back then.
100%. I want to talk about the new single a little bit here. With again, for those listening at home, it's called "Lonely at the Top." It just dropped recently here, November 17th, 2020. Can you tell me a little bit about this single and how it came together?
Yeah, "Lonely at the Top." Believe it or not, that beat, I almost ended up deleting that beat when I made it because I wasn't feeling it at first.
Wow.
The studio I made the beat at, I figured it out. I guess it was the way that they had their monitors set up, which I really like. If I'm not feeling, if the drums ain't smacking me in the face, I really can't mess with it like that. So I laid down that sample. I chopped up that sample and I laid the drums down. It was the drums that turned me off because the way they had their monitors set. So I was like, I'm about to delete it. The son told me, like, nah, just save it and come back to it later. So I ended up coming back to it later, and I accidentally sent that beat when I made it. I accidentally sent that beat to Azariah in a bundle with a bunch of other beats in a batch of beats. And he hit me back the following week. He's like, yo, I'm gonna show you some of the stuff I wrote. And he ended up playing that beat. And I was like, oh shit, you like that beat? He's like, yeah, this beat hot. So I was like, word. He said he got a whole song to it. I said, well, yo, man, let me go back and let me beat the drums up and everything, and let me chop the sample up a little bit more and space it out. So for that first, it was just a straight loop. That loop you hear in the beginning, that was like the whole beat throughout the original whole version. So I went back and I chopped it up. I did some filters on it and everything, and then added a little bit of bass and everything in it, and the 808s and all that. And it came out sounding 10 times doper than the original one. And that was one of the cuts that ain't making it to the Second Coming. So I was like, you know what? We're going to end up putting this out as a single later on. And that's how that came about.
So this was originally meant for the Second Coming?
Yeah, it was supposed to be on the Second Coming.
Gotcha. Are you planning on putting this on the next Young Black and Gifted album, or
putting that on the Young Black and Gifted album?
Yeah. Do you think that this single will end up making it on a future project?
Oh Oh yeah. It's going to definitely be on a what's called. It's going to definitely be on another project. I'm actually trying to aim to get us like another EP ready to drop with all the singles and add a couple bonus tracks on there. So I'm trying to have that done hopefully within the next few weeks.
Oh wow! So before the new year, anyhow.
Yeah, yup.
That's
Like I said,
super exciting.
Just reminding me, I got to hit the cover guy up to knock that cover out. But yeah, I've got a couple other songs I'm gonna throw on there behind. Probably like 3 or 4 unreleased joints, followed by the 5 main singles, or the 4 main. What's that? Warfare, Respect Violence, For the Glory, It's a Rap. Yeah, so that's 5 right now with this one. So dude probably throw like another 2 or 3 more joints on it. Probably a little 8-track EP. So that's for everybody who's just now in tune. Those be tracks they could back. That'd be like a project for them to backtrack on and then go back to the Second Coming. Because we just released the Second Coming on vinyl. So that's out right now too on vinyl.
Gotcha. What about physical media? I wanted to ask about that. I noticed a lot of your releases end up being digital only, at least through Bandcamp. What's your kind of take on physical media? Are you planning on releasing more things on vinyl, tape, CD, etc. in the future?
Yeah, definitely. We put out Second Coming. We do like right now the time where you could do like if you do the physicals. I always say do limited amounts.
Yeah, of
so
course.
It's like cause we did a limited amount. We did like a limited 100 copies of the actual CD, and those sold out quick with the merch. Because every time somebody's buying a shirt, we was giving them a CD with it. So they paid 20 for the shirt. Well, it was 30 everything was going for, so it was 20 for the shirt, 10 for the CD. So all that got sold together, and I ended up moving like 100 CDs in like I want to say about a week or two. People were just buying the shirts up left and right. So definitely plan on getting more CDs pressed up pretty soon for Second Coming. Might do a special edition release for that and throw more songs on there. Got the vinyls right now that's out. There's those limited press too. I believe the company we're going through, I believe he did like 50 to 100 vinyls. So those links is actually on the Young Black and Gifted Instagram page, or you can go to Kid Called Quest, the Kid Called Quest page, and the actual link to the vinyls is in my bio. So you can click on the bios, and that takes you directly to the vinyl purchasing link. But yeah, it's good. I think it is good to have physicals on deck too, because you still got some people who's not 100% in tune with like the streaming services and everything.
Yeah.
So that right there covers that.
Yeah, I also think that the physical copy ends up adding longevity to our release, right? So often you'll end up downloading material. I know I will, especially for this job and interviewing people. I'm constantly having to keep up to date with music, so most of the music that I consume is digital, and I'll download music, but I almost never go back through my hard drive and play shit that came out 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I'm not going back and listening to that shit that I downloaded years ago. What I will do, however, is I'll go to my shelf and I'll go through the shelf and oh shit, I haven't heard this album in 20 years. I haven't heard this album in 15 years. Let's pull it out. Let's bring it into a car. Let's play it. Let's put it into a tape deck. Like whatever it ends up being. It brings me back to listening to that music. I know you have the ability to go back and listen to digital only releases, but at least from my own personal experience, I rarely ever do that. I always go through my shelf though, and I'm always finding old shit that I purchased so long ago and I forgot about, and it brings joy to be able to kind of experience that piece of music. That doesn't happen with digital only releases, even though the ability is there. I really find that having a physical product, even if it is limited and only to 50 or 100 people, those people are going to kind of re-explore your music at some point later in the future just by having that physical copy, and they'll probably end up going and doing their homework at that point as well, saying, oh shit, what did I miss from the group? What did I miss from the solo artists? Let's go back and let's try to do my homework, and maybe I'll end up getting another sale out of it 10 years down the road, right? I think that's really important, and I think something that a lot of artists miss out on nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of the physicals. You know, I miss that a lot too with the physicals, because sometimes you might hear the thing with the physicals. I like you can always go back and read the credits.
Yeah, that too.
So you can see like the physicals taught. Like I learned a lot with the physicals reading the credits, because there was a lot of beats that, from songs that my brother used to play on the radio. I go back and find the actual album, especially the Spot Record Archive here in Rochester, where they had I believe they still got all the used CDs. Used to go and buy a bunch of used hip hop albums and stuff, and look at the credits and all that. And be like, I remember my brother used to play this on the radio back in the day, or I remember he was cutting this up on a mixtape he did. And then you go back and read the credits, you'd be like, oh, I never knew Alchemist did that beat. Oh, I didn't know such and such did that beat. And you'd be like, damn. So that's one thing that the digital, with the physicals, without the physicals, you don't get an opportunity to read those credits. Although Tidal just doing that, but like you said, it's not like having the actual physical in your hand.
Yeah, 100%. I'm working on a book on the development of hip-hop in Canada, and with that I'm doing a lot of research. I'm interviewing a lot of people. I'm gathering a lot of physical media. I'm trying to learn as much as I possibly can about the communities that I'm studying anyhow. And what I found is a lot of the material that's released digital only, especially around 2005, 2006, they're released, that's kind of the first start of albums only being released digitally. And what happens is a lot of those albums you can't find anymore, right? They're released on dead websites, even websites that people have confidence in today, things like Facebook and Instagram or Twitter or whatever it ends up being, YouTube. These things will eventually end up dying, and we've seen that with things like MySpace, for example, or DatPiff, which is kind of fading away as of now, but I think it's probably still up. And I think MySpace is still up, but a lot of that material is gone. So when you're going through and you're trying to locate a lot of this old material, just from a kind of a history perspective and trying to learn about kind of the past and what actually happened, a lot of that material is just lost. If you have something physical, at least it ends up kind of staying the way it was when it was created. Even if it's rare, even if it takes a long time to be able to track down, there's always the hope that you're going to eventually be able to do so. And yeah, some of those releases that are released exclusively on like a 50 run tape or whatever that came out in 99 or 94, those things are almost as impossible to track down, but there's hope that you will be able to stumble across something, or you'll be able to visit somebody's collection and they'll have a copy of it, or maybe even the artist will end up holding on to one of those copies and you'll be able to speak to him. But yeah, this digital only shit is really fucking pressing, and the physical copy is more important, like you said, not just to hear the music, especially from a historian perspective, but to read the liner notes and to be able to see who produced things, what are the connections that were made. Just being able to read the shout outs usually can mean a lot, right? It means that this person was getting along with this other person at X period of time whenever the album was put out. The album has a date on it generally, so you're able to actually pinpoint that the album came out in 1992 or whatever it ends up being. These things are lost with the digital age. If you end up going to a YouTube video and the video was published on August 2nd of 2020, there's no reason to believe that the song was actually released on August 2nd of 2020. There's no reason to believe that the song was even released in the year 2020. Being able to have that physical media, I think, like concretely puts down pieces of information, things like who produced certain joints, when it came out, what relationships were actively formed at that period of time, what relationships had dissolved at that period of time. Those things are all valuable pieces of information when you're trying to later tell the story of an individual scene or a community or a group or an artist, and those things all exist within a CD or a vinyl release or like a cassette tape. So often, unless you're talking about like big name artists, you mentioned Alchemist or like Eminem or whatever it ends up being, these artists are clearly going to have their history marked down in a variety of different places online, and it's probably going to last forever. But for most, especially local artists, that history just gets lost if there's nothing physical tying that together.
True, I agree with you 100% on that. Yeah, like you said, I never thought about that. Like, well, if DatPiff actually shuts down, a lot of material is going to be lost.
Yeah, 100%. And the same thing happened with MySpace. Like, I think MySpace is technically still a website. I think I've been to it even recently, trying to find old material. But those old links are all dead, right? There's music that was uploaded on MySpace in 2006 is no longer available. The domain still exists, but it's no longer an active website.
Yeah, man, it's yeah, 'cause we had like, as far as first group, me and my man NO performed kicks and snares. Like we had a bunch of songs we had uploaded on MySpace, and when you go to visit those MySpace sites, those actual pages, like you said, it's all taken down.
Yep. And the blogs will end up going away eventually. The blogs that are at least relevant today. Websites like Bandcamp will eventually end up going away, right? Like, there has to be something in order to cement the history beyond just uploading it to a variety of different websites. There has to be something. Otherwise, it's inevitably going to get lost. Not only that, but the individual artists simply don't have the ability generally in order to keep hard drives for the remainder of their life, right? They don't keep adequate backup hard drives. They're not trained in any kind of archival processing, so you end up losing that material eventually, right? A hard drive crashes, they don't have a backup, they don't see the importance of keeping a hard drive, so a lot of that material is just kind of in individual files and emails, and they keep track of it that way, but eventually the email server will end up going down. Like, these things are fairly bleak, but there's a real historical value to holding on to that outside of the internet. The internet, I think, is great. It's done so much in terms of being able to collect a lot of these stories and get in contact with a lot of these people. But at the same time, it can't be what we rely on in order to preserve a culture, because the culture, I think, is important. I think there's a lot of great music being made, and I think the culture behind the music is also just as important. I think a lot of that will end up being lost over time because of the reliance on things like the internet.
True.
Yeah.
It's just like YouTube too. Like a lot of like people don't realize, like YouTube, that's history on there. Like it's not all them. That's all visual history, especially for hip hop.
Yeah.
So that's
and
like,
the people that and the actual YouTubers, right? Like the people that are making video exclusively for that website. You have a whole art forum that's made around one website, right? And the same can be said for things like TikTok, or there was another kind of earlier version of TikTok that died a couple years ago, Vine. That's it. Things like Vine. You had like artists on Vine. And I guess you can debate whether or not they should be called artists, but you had creators on Vine that were making videos that were exclusively for that format, and that is just gone, right? You have a whole like medium of art, which is that 6-second video on Vine, that is just lost. Like, all those videos are gone. That's huge, right? And I think YouTube is the same way. You can talk about music, but ultimately music is not it's not made for the purpose of YouTube. It's made and then distributed through YouTube as a way of being able to distribute your music. But there are loads of YouTube content creators that are actively making videos just for YouTube that are just losing their content and losing that history. I think the same thing is happening to Twitch nowadays as well, with a lot of DMCA notices being kind of forcefully making the community delete their kind of their VODs and what they've recorded, and you're just deleting like hundreds and hundreds, thousands of hours of content that's just not backed up anywhere. It's just lost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's sad when the times do come for those websites to come down, because like you said, it's going to be a lot of stuff that's just going to be vanished. It's going to be done, but it's going to be digital dust.
Yeah. So I think it's important anyhow to not only not rely on the internet, but I think to have this conversation more frequently and be able to get the kind of message across that, not just in terms of, oh, here's a reason to put out a CD or a vinyl release or whatever it ends up being, but just to have the mentality that perseverance is something important, and we should be trying to preserve our art and our culture in whatever format you think that's the most kind of appropriate way for your own circumstance, but to at least have it in the back of your mind that we can't feel too confident in what seems permanent today, right? Because things change over time, and we've seen that in the past.
Yeah, and it's like that right now. No, like with when you think about it, what you just said, it's kind of like what's going on right now with like current events. Like, I don't know if newspapers are still around. So everything is on websites now. So like those
Yeah.
websites, those news sites have to go down and everything. A whole history of current events that happened would just disappear. Who to say
Yeah.
45? Well, who to say about 100, 200 years from now, everything that happened this year, when those websites, when those news stations go down, all these current events that happened this year no longer exist. People won't even know these happened.
Yeah, that irritates the fuck out of me. Like I find it crazy that something like the New York Times, for example, is still an active newspaper. You can purchase the newspaper at a newsstand, but the newspaper doesn't have all the material that the New York Times writes and publishes. Right, the vast majority of material that the New York Times puts out is digital only. It's just available on their website. Their website articles, and they're made for that. Those things are, again, just not permanent. And they have a medium and an outlet for preserving that. They're deliberately choosing not to, right? They have a paper that gets circulation, that's out, and that ultimately gets preserved, right? The New York Times gets preserved in various archives. It gets preserved on microfilm, and then put onto into different archives, and these archives are clearly trained to preserve that material. That's their whole job. That's their purpose of being, is perseverance. The fact that these newspapers exist and they're actively choosing to not put their history or their stories down in that format bugs the shit out of me. It's so counter to their whole purpose, right? Their purpose is to be able to convey the news in a way that's more than just word of mouth, right? It's written down news, which seems to have more legitimacy or authority than something word of mouth. That's what they've built themselves on, and to see them kind of strive away from that just because of sales or whatever it ends up being is bothersome. I guess you hope that those organizations have their own like internal archives that they hold and that they keep, and if anything does end up happening, they end up donating those to different archives, kind of locally government ran archives. But ultimately, I don't think we can rely on individuals to make those choices. I think there has to be kind of a more collective consciousness shift in mentality to how we end up thinking about this problem.
Yeah.
100%. I guess to bring it back here to Young, Black, and Gifted, I do want to kind of wrap up that end of the conversation anyhow. What are you guys currently working on? I know you mentioned the EP, and it'll contain some of the singles and maybe a couple bonus cuts on top of that. But in terms of new material, what's currently on the horizon for, say, 2021?
I'll be working on a couple side projects. As a writer, we'll be working on a couple side projects as well. I know I got a couple instrumental projects in the works. What else? Also working with a couple other artists too. Another artist from here named Curtis Cope. You about to be hearing a lot about him pretty soon. He used to go by the name LI back in around 2007, 2008. So he's gearing back up to building up more material. Two other dudes from here. I think you might enjoy listening to their music. Year Jordan and Bro God. They just put out an album called Outer Heaven.
You had production work on there?
No, I ain't got no production work on there. That's just that's their project.
Gotcha.
It's a little EP, but that's somebody you can check out for here. Me and Year Jordan, we probably gonna start doing some stuff pretty soon. But yeah, it's just right now I'm just pretty much following, letting the process take its place.
Gotcha. Man, again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out to speak to me here today. I appreciate it, and I'd love to speak to you again in the future whenever you do end up having new material coming out. I'd love to be able to have this conversation maybe with Azariah, or just kind of, I don't know, keep up to date with the work that you guys are putting out. I'm loving the music, and I want to end up staying up to date and engaged with this conversation and with your story as the time goes on. Where can people find you? You mentioned Instagram earlier. Is that the best place for people to keep in touch with you?
Yep, you can reach us at on Instagram at Young Black and Gifted 585. You can reach me at Kid Called Quest, KIDD CALLEDQUEST YBG on Instagram. So that's Kid Called Quest YBG. You can hit Azariah at AZARIAHYBG. So that's Azariah YBG. So you can just follow us right on there. If you got Twitter, Kid Called Quest. Pretty much everything is Kid Called Quest.
Perfect.
And Azariah on Twitter is Smooth Freshness. And that's most of the social media right there. And you can just go, if you want to watch some of our music videos that we release for the Second Coming, you could go to the YouTube, just type in Young Black and Gifted Second Coming, and a bunch of videos should pop up. We just put out a mini documentary for the Second Coming. It's pretty much explain the creative process and everything with that.
Super dope.
You can also check us out on Paper Chasers and Pocket Vibe YouTube channels. So you can pretty much just stay in tune with us through that.
Sounds good. Once again, man, thank you so much, and I'd love to speak to you again.
Thanks, man. I definitely appreciate the phone call.